Now, if Messiah can also be from the dead, what's the big deal? Why did so many rabbis believe that it would only be King David? What was so special about King David that made him the penultimate candidate to be Messiah? Well, first of all, he would restore the Davidic dynasty. He would certainly fulfill all of those things, all those conditions that Maimonides has identified. Those were all things that King David did. He was a master at the Torah. He was concerned about the people, made sure that the people did what they had to do. He was also somebody who was willing to take on enemies. Messiah can't be a wimp, just somebody who reads the Bible and afraid of a shadow. That's not a man. That's a lulav. That's somebody that just shakes around the whole day. But that's not what a leader is. A leader is somebody who has only fear of God and is willing to take on anybody who fights God. And so King David is the ultimate warrior, the ultimate scholar, the ultimate caregiver to the Jewish people. There's another factor here. King David asked God, he asked God that he should guarantee him that his flesh should remain forever. Why is it necessary for King David's body to remain whole? So the answer can be understood from what it says in the Talmud. Rabbi Joshua ben Levi met Elijah the prophet, and he wanted to see the Messiah. He wanted to know when Messiah is coming. So Elijah the prophet said, "Go ask Messiah yourself. Where is he? He's at the gateway of Rome. How will I find him? Well, he's found among the poor people who are sick, and they're all binding their wounds. So how am I going to find him?" The answer is everybody unties all of their bandages at one time, puts the salve on all the sores, and then ties them up all together at once. He will be taking only one bandage at a time. Why? Because if the time is right for Messiah to come, he should be ready at a moment's notice. This is important. Anyone who has died, if he were to become the Messiah, would first have to undergo resurrection of the dead. That may take a long while for that to happen. So King David, on the other hand, was a man whose body remained whole. So at a moment's notice, King David was ready to come and to save the people of Israel. That's why the men of the Talmud, the Yerushalayim Talmud, Rav Papa, all thought that King David would be the Messiah. Now, those who are candidates to be the Messiah, who are alive, they're here already. The people who have died, you know why they can't be the Messiah? Not because Messiah can't be from the dead, but Messiah has to be ready to come at a moment's notice. Only those candidates whose life was a life of purity, that were able to have all of the positive, charismatic abilities of King David and purified their bodies so that their bodies would not decompose, those are the only ones who it's possible for them to be the Messiah. The Talmud tells us that there was Rabbi Choyi who was found in the grave to be completely whole. So Talmud in Shabbos 151b, the grave diggers went in and they touched his body and says, "What are you guys doing? Be careful." They asked who he was, and he answered, "Rabbi Choyi." The question was, how did he remain whole? Nobody else has remained whole from thousands of great men. The answer is he never ever had any jealousy. And so people who didn't have jealousy, who were on a very, very high spiritual level, those people's bodies remain whole. They are like King David, and they can come at any time. This is also what is meant that Jacob, our father, never died. What do you mean he never died? He was buried, he was embalmed. The answer is that his body did not decompose. And in fact, those people whose body does not decompose, the Rabbeinu Bachya in Parshas Vayechi, the end of Genesis, says that those people whose bodies are whole, and up until Rabbi Judah the Prince, there are only two such people, perhaps he would include King David with them, they were able to come anytime they wanted back into this world, because besides their physical bodies that was in the grave, they had a manifestation of their physical bodies that was semi-spiritual and semi-physical, and they were able to come and go as they pleased. And this too might have been the reason why Rabbi Judah the Prince was considered the Messiah. And I have evidence to indicate that even after his death, he was considered the Messiah by his student Rav. That being said, this is the reason for only certain people to be considered the Messiah if they had already died. Talmud identifies one of them was Daniel, Ish Hamudas, Daniel of the Lions Den. Daniel was a man of great courage and of great piety at the same time. You had to have both complete spiritual perfection as well as physical perfection. Physical perfection means that he worked with his body and made sure that the body remained pure and purified throughout his entire lifetime. And for that reason, only those righteous men whose body remained whole, only those righteous men could be considered candidates for Messiah if they were deceased. But Messiah can be from those who are living or those who are deceased. In fact, from the Talmud would indicate, from Rashi anyway, that Messiah who Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi met at the gates of Rome, Rashi says not the gates of Rome, it's really Gan Eden, the Garden of Eden, that he really resides in the spiritual realm. And in that spiritual realm, he's ready to come at a moment's notice. In other words, his body is whole, his soul is whole, he's ready to come. So you see, according to Rashi, the possibility of someone who's deceased could also be the Messiah, because if he's ready to come at a moment's notice, then, and there's no restriction, he doesn't have to be resurrected, then that person could also be the Messiah. From Rashi it would appear that it would be a particular person. We've just shown from the Maimonides that Messiah is not a particular person. It is a person who has the capacity to fulfill the Davidic role. King David, of course, was the ultimate, but the conclusion of the Talmud is that there will be somebody who will be even better than King David in this process and will complete what King David himself could not fulfill, could not complete. And so this explains to us, that Messiah can be from the dead, but only those dead whose body remain whole, and why it has to be those kinds of people, because they have to be ready for at a moment's notice. They can't wait until there's going to be the resurrection. So you ask, well, how can you say that a present-day tzaddik is of this level? I can't tell you about anyone else, but I can tell you about the fifth Lubavitch Rebbe, who was the father of the Rebbe's father-in-law. The Rebbe Rashab was buried in 1920. In 1920, he was buried in Rostov, and in 1942, 22 years later, they had to remove his body because the Russians were putting a railroad through the Jewish cemetery, right through the Rebbe's grave. As they were removing the Rebbe's body, the talus unfolded, and they saw the Rebbe's body was whole. And the Rebbe looked exactly as he did the day that they buried him, because the people who had buried him initially were the ones who were asked to bury him, rebury him the second time. And in fact, in Kfar Chabad, where I was for 4 years, one of the great Hasidim, Rabbi Yonah Edelkop, was one of those who actually saw this happening. He saw that the body was whole. And so we know that even today there are tzaddikim whose body remained whole, and certainly the soul is whole, and so therefore Messiah can even be the dead from the deceased, as long as they are completely pious people. People like the Lubavitcher Rebbe could be the Messiah, as well as those who are tzaddikim from those who are alive.